Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a wonderful webinar presented, Classroom Management, The Basics of Behavior by Tahra Cessna, board certified behavior analyst with Bierman Autism Centers and Treasure Coast Autism Project.
Great. Thank you so much for introducing me. I'm happy to be here. Classroom management is near and dear to my heart. I was a former educator teaching, in the elementary level, public school, general ed, and then I got into special needs. And from there, I opened up a school for individuals with special needs, and that opened in 2011. So that's, classrooms for individuals with autism. And so I've been doing behavior a long time, doing classroom management a long time, and worked with many school districts in the past. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited to get started. I'm going to go over a little bit of our agenda for today. This is going to be either a 2 or 3-part series because the basic principles of ABA and behavior are quite a lot, and I want to make sure that we understand and can think about examples and how to apply them in our real world settings and in our classrooms specifically. So today we'll talk about the basic principles of applied behavior analysis, where we deep dive into really understanding behavior, what it is and what it isn't, and then the different variables that affect behavior and why we do what we do. And then we're going to talk about teaching some replacement behavior. So if we think about anything that we want to change or adapt, we have to replace that with something else. So we'll talk about those components today, and then we'll get into the heart of classroom management for the next training. So I'm going to be interactive. I appreciate if those that are on the call today don't mind participating. There's no wrong or right answer. We're just here to kind of make sure that we understand these principles together. So I want to talk about basic principles. And when we think about applied behavior analysis, I want you to wipe your mind clear of typical descriptions for positive and negative and descriptors for reinforcement and punishment. Take those away, and we're going to describe them in a way that really is behavior analytical here. So if you think about the word positive, in our field, positive means that something's been added, right? Something added to the environment. It could be good or bad, but it's been added. Negative means that something has been removed. So if we think about that first, positive added, negative removed. Now, if it's reinforcement, reinforcement is used to typically increase the likelihood of a future behavior. So it's reinforcement if I add something to the environment, positive reinforcement. I add something to the environment, and that individual continues to do and engage in that behavior. That's reinforcement because it continues. Negative reinforcement is where I would remove that stimuli or aversive, and the individual continues to engage in that same behavior. So it's still reinforcement. The behavior is occurring, but something's been removed. So again, subtracted. And then punishment decreases the likelihood of a behavior. So if it's positive, it means I've added something to the environment that reduces the future frequency of that behavior. And if it's negative, I've removed something that decreases the future frequency. So with that being said, let's think about this as it applies to classrooms. So in positive reinforcement, a teacher notices that a student's been consistently raising their hand before speaking instead of calling out. So as a reward, the teacher gives the student a sticker or praises them in front of the class. So something has been added, which is praise and a sticker. And we assume that this individual's behavior of raising their hand is going to continue. So this is where we're reinforcing that and saying, I enjoyed that you're doing that and I appreciate it. I want to see more of that. Now, in negative reinforcement, the example here would be a teacher gives a student a set of difficult math problems for homework each night. And however, but if the student participates actively in class and completes their work efficiently, the teacher will reduce the number of homework problems they have to do. So the behavior of having to do math at night is my behavior, but I'm reinforced because I'm reducing it, or I don't even have to come in contact with it. It's been removed. I don't have to do all those problems anymore. I only have to do 5 instead of 10, for example. So that's an example. And I often hear that people say, oh no, they're using negative reinforcement with my child. I don't want negative reinforcement on my child. Negative reinforcement is amazing, and we do it all the time. And I think about today, I had a headache, so I took aspirin, right, to get rid of my headache. Every time I get a headache, the aspirin works. So I'm going to remove that pain. I'm going to remove that aversive, and I'm going to take aspirin again. So negative reinforcement is a good thing. It's not the word negative. I want to take out that connotation of being bad. It just means removed. Now, positive punishment, an example here, a student is repeatedly running in the hallway. And I know we see this all the time, despite all those reminders to walk. As a consequence, the teacher requires the student to write, I will walk in the hallway 10 times. So the behavior, right, was running, and now something was added to punish them, and it says now I have to write, right? So I've added this having to write behavior, and hopefully that decreases that future frequency. I don't want to have to do that again, so I'm no longer gonna run in the hallways. And now negative punishment, if we think about this, a student keeps talking during a lesson despite multiple warnings. And so as a consequence, the teacher says, okay, now I have to take away that excess recess time that you earned earlier. So we've removed that recess time, something has been taken away. And now hopefully later on or tomorrow, the teacher's not going to continue talking after those prompts were provided, because they're going to say, I want my recess time. I don't want to lose the extra time that I've earned this morning. Does anybody want to share like an example of a positive reinforcement that they have in their everyday life, or maybe in a classroom example out in the audience? Guess that's a no. So I want you to think about this, though, for those that are listening in. Think about examples of what this might look like in your everyday, not only in your classroom, but in your home setting. I am going to move forward. So I want you to think about this. So what do we know or think we know about behavior? And maybe I can have participants respond to this. Anybody want to tell me what do we think we know about behavior? What do we know about behavior? Oh, we have somebody that raised their hand. Wonderful. Michelle. No, I don't know how to help Michelle respond. Rita, are you able to help me, or Cheney?
Yeah, I allowed her to talk. So, Michelle, you can unmute and speak.
Still showing muted on my end, Michelle.
You can also, Michelle, put your response in the chat if you would like, if you're not able to unmute.
Look like we might have lost her. Wade, do
Yeah,
you have?
maybe she was having technical difficulties.
Yeah, I got through. I can speak real quick. I was just thinking that behavior to me is generally how a person's acting.
Right. You're exactly right. So it's anything a person says or does. And what I want us to think about behavior is Olden Lindsley taught us this, that if a dead person can do it, it's not behavior. So when you have somebody that's ignoring you, for example, I've asked them to get up and they're not moving. If a dead person can do it, it's not behavior, right? It also has to be observable and measurable, and it has to be something that we can agree on. So this is something I want us to think about, that observable, measurable, the dead person can do it, it's not behavior. And we're going to talk about a little bit of examples and non-examples in the next slide, because when we're defining behaviors, we want to make sure that we're defining it accurately so that we can change that behavior in the most appropriate way. Thank you for participating, me. So what do we know about behavior, and why does it continue to occur over time? So what I want to explain to you is that what goes on in the environment affects our behavior. So think about if you were to walk into a dark classroom, what behavior might you expect to see? What I would do is I'm going to reach for the light switch, right? So every time I walk into a dark classroom, I look for that light switch, I feel for it, and I turn the light switch on and the lights come on. So every time I walk into a dark room, I can generalize not only my classroom, but my bedroom, for example, I'm going to turn the lights on. So what happens in the environment affects my behavior. I'm not looking for a light switch when the lights are on or when it's daytime. I don't need to do that. But because it was dark, my seeking of a light switch was important, and it was then reinforced. So I'm going to do it again and again. What happens after the behavior occurs, or what happens after the behavior occurs makes it continue. So because I was able to receive light for turning on that light switch, I'm going to do that again and again. Behavior is also affected by physical and emotional conditions. So think about when you haven't had a lot of sleep or when you're not feeling well. And I had a child in my classroom that really lovely child, but every Monday, for whatever reason, they would come into the classroom anxious and jittery, and they seemed very upset, almost just overly hyper. And this happened like from multiple Mondays in a row, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, fine. I didn't understand what is going on in the setting event here. But what I found out was the child spends the weekends with dad. Dad brings the child in to school on Mondays, but dad was allowing the child to have coffee before getting to school. And so this actually kind of exacerbated some of these behaviors that we might see. And they were also very, they responded a little differently. So those physical and emotional conditions were impacting this child's learning throughout the morning with me. And then behavior changes as children, mature and develop new skills. We see this all the time. Think about the onset of language. Think about the onset of crawling or walking. These are what we call behavioral cusps. And once I'm able to verbalize, and maybe not just vocalize it with my mouth, but I can request it on an augmentative device. I can use a picture exchange. I can sign for it. It opens up my world, right? I can get my needs and my wants met. And then I can also access things when I'm mobile, right? If I'm able to move about freely and independently, now I'm able to access other things, and it opens my world up. So my behaviors are going to change over time as I learn new skills. And I want to put this out there too for our teachers. Behavior in classroom management, it's not just for children with special needs. You should be spending as much time as you spend on your lesson plans, planning for classroom management. How are you going to set up your rules? How are you going to reinforce your individual students? How are you going to call on them and make sure that you don't miss anybody? How are you going to have them, enter and exit the classroom? How are you going to have them head to recess versus heading to the lunchroom versus heading to another teacher? These are things that you need to set from the beginning, write it out, practice and rehearse. The first month of school as an elementary teacher, I practiced classroom management. And if my kids didn't do it right, we rehearsed and we did it over and over until they got it right, because I want them to be able to learn. The less time I have to manage their behaviors over and over again, the more I can spend teaching them. And that's the goal. So don't think of classroom management as a secondary component to teaching. It's quite primary. And I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on some of that today. We're going to talk about the ABCs of behavior, because when we understand the antecedent and the consequences, we're going to understand how behavior is shaped. And as a behavior analyst, I work with a lot of families and teachers, and sometimes we're put in the component where people say to me, I need you to fix that child's behavior. I need you to like correct them, fix the behavior. I don't fix behavior. I don't necessarily change behavior. I shape behavior. And the way I do that is through the environment with antecedents and consequences. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. We'll get into what this really means. We start with the B, the ABCs. The B is our behavior, right? A behavior is anything a person says or does, as Wade mentioned before. And I want you to think of this. So can the behavior be measured and observed? Does it result in changes in the environment, at least temporarily? Again, I mentioned if a dead person can do it, then it isn't behavior. And we're going to go over examples of this. But if you think for a second, think about the different behaviors that you've engaged in just to get to this webinar. You had to arrive on time, and you had to open your computer, and you had to, download the link to get on. And then you had to mute yourself, and those are all behaviors that are happening that we can all agree that we can witness. They're observable and measurable, and they're getting you to some end result. Some definitions of behavior. If we think of some good examples here, striking with a closed fist. If we were to say that the child engages in hitting, that's not really enough for me to understand, like, how hard am I going to expect to get hit? But if they strike with a closed fist, I can anticipate that I'm going to end up with some bruising if I don't, manage myself appropriately. Screams butthead. We can all agree that we heard that it came out of their mouth. And then asking for help. These are all good examples. We can all agree that these happened or did not happen. Non-examples is to say that somebody is defiant. What does that look like? Again, defiance can also be done by a dead person. So we'd say that is not a non-example. Somebody is disrespectful. My definition of disrespectful and yours may vary. So we would define that. What does that look like? Does it mean that they didn't look me in the eye when I was talking to them? Did it mean that they threw the papers on the ground when I presented them? Did it mean that they cursed at me when I asked them to do a task? And then angry, again, what does that look like? Are they red in the face? Are they maybe, pumping their fists on a desk? Are they pacing? What are they doing? What does that look like? So we have to think about the whole behavior and what we call the topography, what it looks like and does not look like. So we're going to think about this. And I don't know if, Felicia or Wade or anybody else would like to just, if I said, are these behaviors screaming? Is that a yes or a no? Is that behavior? Does anybody want to answer?
Felicia said yes.
Oh, wonderful. I cannot see when they're responding. I appreciate that. So screaming, yes, that is a behavior we can all agree. Sometimes we can define it to say if I heard, a vocal sound that was audible from, 20 feet away, they're screaming. What about aggressive? Is that behavior?
We have some yeses in the chat for that one too.
Okay, now think about this. Aggressive, what does it look like? Did I define this well? So while we can say that it potentially is a behavior, is it a behavior that we can well observe and measure and define? So aggressive would be one that we would say it's not well defined. And we'd have to really list that out because your aggressive and my aggressive may look very different. So it stumps us sometimes. What about happy? Is that a behavior? And think about
No.
definitions, observable and measurable. What's that, Wade?
No.
No, right. We could assume that smiling means that we're happy, but I notice a lot of their students that smile not because they're happy, but sometimes because they're nervous or because they're anxious. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're happy, right? So we would really have to define what this individual's, what does it mean for them to be happy? Are they skipping? Are they whistling? Are they smiling? Are they, what do they do when they're happy? What about throw?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, we can say that we know what throw means, right? It means you pick something up and you threw it through the air. Yes. What about touching hair?
Yes.
Yes, we can all say that they touched hair. What about anxious?
No.
Right. What does anxious look like, right? It's not enough for us to say that we could observe and measure that. What about on-task behavior? Just in the words on task.
Yes.
All right, wait, I'm going to ask you then, but what does on task look like? Because sometimes now, like we picture a child, they have a book, right? And they're reading it like this, but in front of that book is their phone and they're texting. So are they really on task? So we would really want to define it that this individual is engaged in the activity, they're responding appropriately, their answers are, aligned with the questions, that kind of stuff. So on task is not enough for us to define it and say it's a true behavior. What about upset?
No.
No, good. What about walk to the door?
Yes.
Yes, good. And ask for help.
Yep.
Right. We can all see somebody, and the way we ask for help may look very different. I could sign it. I can use my augmentative device. I can raise my hand, but we're asking for help. So yes, good job. Thank you, Wade. I really appreciate you. And this is just for, participants to think about what behaviors have you experienced in your classroom this year? And these are not only behaviors in the form of negative behaviors, but positive behaviors. So, how does your class line up? How does your class, get their materials ready? How do your class end the day? How do they interact with one another? How are they in the lunchroom? How do they ask for help? So think about those behaviors and think about, do I have a good method? Does my classroom and my students understand what I expect of them when I want them to wait, when I want them to ask for help, when I see that they're frustrated? What are the things that they should be doing and should not be doing? So these examples and non-examples are really important for your students, and practice is really important as well. So we also, when we think about behaviors, thinking about those, what we call maladaptive, or those behaviors that we want to change, we want to prioritize them. And there's a way to remember them. These are just a hierarchy of challenging behaviors. So dangerous, destructive, disruptive, disturbing, and developmentally inappropriate. So let's say you have a child who is in the lunchroom and they eat very, very quickly, where they're constantly choking or gagging on food to the point where we've had to do the Heimlich multiple times. But they also burp really loud, and it gets the other students at the table engaged, and they're laughing or they're pointing fingers. We would prioritize a behavior over the other. So while the burping could be disturbing, disruptive, kind of disgusting, it's not something that's going to impede, right? It's not posing a harm to him or those around him. So we have to first say, I've got to I've got to channel and target the behavior of eating so quickly that he chokes every day. And then we'll target the burping, right? We'll shape that down when we can, but let's first prioritize those dangerous behaviors. And it's things that we have to think about is like what's truly important. And when we want to shape a behavior, it has to be shaped in the fact that this is challenging. It's going to cause harm, injury, something negative to the individual or to the individuals around them. If it doesn't, we can call it junk behavior and it can be ignored. And for some of us, certainly in the classrooms, we can't always ignore these behaviors, but we have to think about a kid who just burps randomly, every couple of minutes. We have to think about what's the function of that. Why are they engaging in that behavior? And is it worth shaping right now? Or can I wait a little bit later before I start targeting, the management of that behavior? So think about your hierarchy and why we need to prioritize. So now we get to the A of ABCs, and A stands for antecedent. And this is anything that happens immediately before a behavior. So this is our fast trigger. This is something that we can see in the environment. So let's consider what's going on right before the behavior. That's going to cause our behaviors to change. And then what changes or interactions occur in the environment just prior to the behavior. So let's think about, actually, I have examples next. Let's do that. So examples of antecedents. So an individual is denied an item, right? If they're denied access, we can anticipate that there's going to be some kind of behavior that's going to occur after that. An individual is asked to do a non-preferred task. An individual is asked to end a preferred task. Okay, come on, close your book, or get off the slide. It's time to go into the classroom. Individual is told to wait for a food item. Another individual is having a behavior around them that could also trigger, my internal states and what I'm going to then engage in. Lack of attention giving to an individual, change in a routine or schedule, and negative peer interactions. We're going to look at what these antecedents can do in the environment on behavior in a moment, and we're going to figure out what we can do about it. So there are setting events that are important too. And a setting event is a slow trigger. I kind of alluded to this earlier when I talked about the child who had coffee in the morning, when that wasn't a fast trigger, right? I didn't see that child drinking the coffee. What I did see were the behaviors and, how he reacted thereafter when he was in my classroom. So a setting event is a slow trigger, and it's a condition that happens long before the behavior occurs. And it sets the stage for that behavior to occur. So Wade or Felicia or anybody, do you want to think about what would be an example of like a setting event, maybe to coming here today, that we might not be able to see in the here and now?
Maybe like transition.
So a transition, you're right. So a transition is certainly an antecedent, but a transition is happening. I'm asking him, right, to get up and transition. But think about something that might have happened hours before we are here together. What are some examples of that?
We had to get out of bed.
Yes, getting up, right? Waking up. Maybe I didn't get a lot of sleep the night before. Maybe I usually wake up through my alarm, and instead my brother was throwing up, in the room next to me, and I heard that and it woke me up, and I didn't get back to sleep. So yeah, the sleep affects us, right? That is called a setting event, and it's a slow trigger. Anything else?
It could be anything really, right?
Right. Yeah. So on my way here, for example, I got a flat tire, and, then I didn't have a spare, and then I had to call AAA, and then I had to wait, and then it made me late. So now I'm flustered and I have to give this talk today. So thinking about those are all setting events that we might not see, but it's going to impact us in the present moment. So we want to consider like what's going on a while before that behavior happened and what conditions were present that could have influenced them. And in the classroom setting, sometimes there are children that are on new medication and we might not be aware of, and that those medications could have side effects that we can't see. They could be getting sick. They could have had a parent that has left the environment and they're not used to, being without them. So those things are all going to impact in the here and now. And that's where we as teachers have to be intuitive and think about what kind of demands am I going to place on this individual today, knowing the setting events that impacted them this morning, and then how am I going to reinforce them or kind of flood them with reinforcement because they're gonna struggle to do the things they normally can do, independently, where they don't have challenging setting events. So there are some clues to setting events that we can kind of look for. Have there been changes in the student's typical routines or activity patterns that you're noticing? Could health issues be affecting the student? So maybe there was changes in diet or sleep patterns. There's illness or pain or discomfort. Did something occur earlier in the day or in another setting? So maybe on the school bus or at home. And then did the student's behavior vary from day to day in the same circumstances? So gosh, that's so weird that they're acting this way today because yesterday and the day before, when I gave them this request, they were fine with it. They didn't have any problems. And today they're throwing things at me and they're spitting and they're running out of the room. I don't understand. So we have to consider what might be happening that we can't see or understand. So C is consequence. Again, this is not consequence as in negative. This is consequence as anything that happens right after a behavior. Anything. So consider this. What occurs right after the behavior in terms of the results or reactions? And how does the child benefit from the behavior? So we really want to think about what's the payoff, because the consequence is going to continue to shape my behavior. Either I continue to do it or I stop. I terminate that because of the consequence I received. A consequence literally is anything that happens after the behavior. So don't think of it as negative. So we're going to talk about functions of behavior. And when you understand functions, it opens your world to understanding all the things that we were doing either wrong or incorrectly in our classroom that were really reinforcing the behavior when we shouldn't have been reinforcing them. So we think about positive reinforcement. This is to get something, right? I either want attention or interaction. I want my favorite activity or an object, or I want sensory feedback or stimulation. And we're going to describe what this means in the forms of functions in a moment. And then if I want to avoid or escape or delay something, this is negative reinforcement. And maybe I want to avoid a difficult or undesirable work. Maybe there's painful or stressful condition that's coming up, but I see it coming and I don't want to engage in that. Or maybe something is awkward or confusing. So I want to avoid, escape, or delay. That's going to give me some negative reinforcement in the behaviors I engage in. Let's look at this a little more closely. So if we think about the 4 functions, there's a way to remember it. I mean, everybody eats, so E-A-T-S. The first function is E, and that's escape or avoidance. And there is a difference. So let me give you an example, escape. So I am walking down the street and it begins to rain. I reach in my backpack and I pull out my umbrella and I now escape the rain. I got wet, but I'm no longer getting wet. Avoidance. In the same example, I'm in my home and I see that it's raining outside. So before I walk to my car, I grab my umbrella and I avoid the rain altogether. So I didn't get wet at all. So I avoided it. So I can see it coming and I don't enter it, or I'm in it and I want to get out of it. So some antecedents to escape and avoidance: a task can be presented, a new activity begins, I'm engaged in an undesirable activity, or this setting is just aversive. The kids around me are really screaming and arguing and it's hurting my ears, or the lights are buzzing and I don't like that sound, or there's a lawnmower mowing the grass in the field. It's bothering me. Some consequences for escape and avoidance: this is going to maintain this behavior. If they get to exit the activity or the environment, they're going to continue to do that behavior because it got them what they were seeking. Or if a task is delayed or removed, again, I'm going to continue that behavior because I got what I wanted with escape or avoiding that. A is for attention. And so attention is any time that I want interaction from others outside of myself. So if others are engaged in some other activity or themselves, like, hey, I'm over here, I want you to pay attention to me. Or if attention is withdrawn, this is me, trying to seek out that behavior. So what I can get, attention, can be in the form of comments, eye contact, expression, or interaction. So it's anything following the behavior. And what we have to realize as teachers, so if you're teaching in the classroom and somebody starts getting disruptive, or kiddos are, in the back there just messing around, you can walk closely to them, right? Get right on them. Oftentimes it shapes the behavior and they settle down, they see you coming. But you also have to remember that you're giving attention. So if their whole purpose for being disruptive was to get you to do that, they're going to continue to do that. It's powerful. But if it was, for anything else, you can move over there. But think about that, moving over to somebody. Even a gaze is attention, whether we think it is or not. Well, I didn't say anything to them. Why would that be attention? If I look in your direction, I'm attending to you, and it's powerful. T is a tangible, right? So obtaining that item. So an antecedent for a tangible behavior could be that requests for an item have been denied or delayed. Oh, we can't eat the sandwich yet. We don't have lunch for another hour. we can't access the science room yet. We're going to have science in about 30 minutes. Or items are presented, but they're not accessible. So if you think about the tall bookshelves that you might have in your classroom, and maybe a kiddo wants to access the toys or books at the very top, I'm going to engage in behaviors that are going to help me to get that tangible. The behaviors will cease when giving that item or activity. So I know that it was based on behaviors were occurring because of the request for tangible, because as soon as I give them that book, that toy, access to their sandwich or access into the science room, they're fine. So I know that that was maintained by wanting that item. And then the final one is sensory. This one it's more challenging to shape because it's automatic. It happens regardless. Nobody has to be around and this behavior will happen. So if an individual is alone, there are no other environmental conditions being applied. The consequence is the behavior results in sensory input. So I want you to think about this. If you had a mosquito bite on your leg, what do? Typically you scratch it. You don't need anybody else there for it to feel good, for you to feel relief when you scratch that mosquito bite. You're doing it because it feels good to do so. And so you have to think about the students in your classroom and the behaviors they're engaging that might be automatic. So we might see some stimming behavior, some hand flapping, some noise making, some spinning. They're going to do that regardless. And they're not trying to tell you anything. They're not trying to say, hey, I want that item. Hey, I want you to come look at me. Hey, I want to get out of this activity. They're just doing it because it feels good to do so. Now, if there are behaviors where it's causing them pain or harm, such as eye gouging, elbowing themselves in the ribs, dropping to their knees very suddenly, we have to shape that. And we have to figure out what is going to help to replace that behavior in a way that's going to give them the same kind of input, but not going to damage or hurt them. Does anybody have any questions on the functions of behavior? I know this is a lot, and I know I appreciate whoever's participating. I thank you so much. But is there any questions that you had on that or anything I can expand further? All right, moving on. So remember this as well, that sometimes the same behavior serves a different function under different circumstances. So, for example, one child will elope, run out of of doing math, while another child elopes, runs out to get the adult to chase them. And so we have to think about the way that we're going to shape those behaviors. If a child is running away to get out of doing math, well, I'm going to make sure that they don't get to escape from math. They're going to, hey, all right, you don't have to do it at your desk, but you can do it on the floor. You can choose another area to do it, but we're going to do this math worksheet. But if it's for me to chase them, I got to make sure that I have set the environment up so that I'm not running after them, because that can be dangerous. And if they're constantly, trying to get me to chase, we've got to teach them, we can play chase in the playground. We can play chase after school. When can we engage in it? But it's not right now. So we've got to think about how we would shape those behaviors, what consequences we would put in place, and what antecedent environmental manipulations we would make. The two functions in the above example, if the child elopes to get out of doing math, if we think about escape, tangible, sensory, what kind of function do we think escaping? I guess I said it. The child elopes from math. It's escape, right? Or avoidance if they saw it coming. And then getting to chase obviously would be our attention condition, because I want you to come play with me. Sometimes different behaviors serve the same function under similar conditions. So example, a child screams when a favorite toy is out of reach and hits the teacher when recess is delayed. So the function here is that they want access. They want access to a toy and they want access to recess. But the topography of what they engaged in changed. My behavior changed. I'm screaming to get my toy and I'm hitting to get access to recess, but it's still the same function. So I have to channel that in the same way. My interventions will be very similar in these. I'm going to teach the child how to ask, right? Use your words. You can hold on a minute, raise your hand, tap me on the shoulder, and we will reinforce that. So replacement behaviors. This is where it gets fun, right? We start understanding functions, and now we can kind of shape the behavior. We can change our environments, and we can add different reinforcers and or punishment, but I don't recommend punishment. That is our absolute last resort. But we can put these procedures in place so that we can shape those behaviors. And I'll remind you this, punishment doesn't teach. Replacement behaviors and reinforcement teaches. So If you're using punishment, recognize that that's only going to stop the behavior in the here and now in the present. But over time, that behavior can come back. It can be shaped again. So it's not something you want to rely on. So for replacement behaviors, once we know the function of an appropriate behavior or of an inappropriate behavior, we can replace that with something that is more appropriate that serves the same function. The desired behavior will produce a competitive reinforcement. So we're gonna go through multiple examples of this so you can kind of see how this ABC works, this chain of replacements work. But I think we have to understand that if we get the function wrong, our interventions are not going to match appropriately, and the behaviors are going to continue or get worse. Another thing I want you to think about too is anytime we shape a behavior to start reducing. So if you have a child who constantly screams in classroom, we're shaping that behavior to no longer scream. The behavior usually gets worse before it gets better. And that's called the extinction burst. And so we have to be prepared for that and know that this is going to get bad. I'm going to continue with my intervention because if I waver or I stop or I limit it in some way, the behavior will get even worse and it'll last even longer. So once you determine what the function is and you realize that this is the best intervention to replace it, you're going to stick with it, and everybody in the environment is going to help to stick with it. So let's look at some types of replacement behavior. So requesting an item or activity. So instead of hitting or screaming, I can say, I want. When may I have? I can raise my hand. In order to request attention, instead of like burping really loudly or spitting at you, I can say, hey, can I tell you about, or hey, let's play. To request assistance, I can say I need some help with, or can I do this differently? And requesting a termination of an item or activity or a break, please stop. I need more time, 1 more minute. And there's ways we can do this. It's not just vocal requesting. It is also through gestures, through pointing, through signing, anything that this individual uses to communicate their wants and needs. But we want to teach them how to do these things rather than the challenging behavior. There are types of desired behaviors. Now, these aren't necessarily what we would say is a replacement, but it's a desired because it's something that we want to teach inadvertently. So tolerating and self-regulation. So having an individual take deep breaths, accepting no, being told to wait, right? Waiting for that desired activity. This is very challenging for our learners that have special needs. Tolerance and self-regulation is not something that they are able to just come upon. We do have to practice this. And when we're teaching tolerance and self-regulation, I'm not teaching it in the moment. Like if somebody's already upset and heightened, I'm not working on teaching them how to deep breathe. I'm not working on, hey, you just have to learn how to accept. No, that's not going to happen. We have to practice it when they are calm. So this is something I do with my learners who engage in those challenging behaviors where they really are flipping out and it takes them a long time to come back down. I'm reading the social stories when they first arrive with me. I'm working on, hey, let's blow out our candles on our fingers, or let's work on our deep breaths. What does this look like? I'm sharing that, we're shaping that, we're talking about it so that when they do come into the contact where they're really frustrated, we remind them, let's use our strategies. Remember, we practiced this. What does this look like? And that's when they can start to do that. Social skills. Again, we're not necessarily saying that this is a replacement behavior, but it's totally desired. So if an individual learner can start having conversations with peers, they can use their manners, they can take turns, they can interrupt appropriately. This is going to give them access to so much. It opens their world up in life, thinking about job placement and friends and all of the things that go with it. So these are desired behaviors that we specifically have to teach, but using manners is not going to be a replacement behavior for a challenging behavior, but it is going to help them and open their world up. And when they have these things, it will reduce challenging behaviors. And then academic behaviors. We want, individuals to complete their tasks independently, follow classroom routines and schedules. Again, we have to practice it, but completing a task is not going to be a replacement necessarily. So let's look at this in practice. I love using, these types of forms. So we're going to go across. So the setting event here, Stephen didn't sleep well the night before. So we know this is a slow trigger. I can't see that Stephen didn't sleep well, but we know that he didn't. A triggering antecedent, something that happened immediately in the environment. Another student teases Stephen and calls him names. So the behavior, what does Stephen do? He screams at the student and strikes him. what the student does, now the student stops teasing and Stephen escapes the situation while in a timeout. This is the consequence. But we don't want Stephen to have to scream at the student and strike him, right? We don't want him to have to sit in a timeout to get escape from this behavior. What we want to do is replace it. So we're going to teach Stephen instead, if another student is teasing you and calling you names, what can we do? Oh, hey, you can ask the student to stop. Why don't you leave the area? Why don't you go raise your hand the next time this kiddo is picking on you and I'll come over and I'll help you, right? That's a nice replacement behavior. So we're teaching him what to do instead of screaming. What we'd love for Stephen to start learning is to help, start ignoring, right? Tolerate that teasing. And then his typical consequence now, he's going to get praised for using coping skills. He's going to earn classroom awards. Hey, Stephen, I recognize that Tommy was really giving it to you. I saw him even start throwing things at you when you didn't engage and you still ignored. That was really great. And I'm glad that I saw you walk away. Good job. Go give yourself a star. So these are things that we can think about. What is maintaining these behaviors and how do we shape that and change it? We're going to do another example. And then if you don't mind, anybody that wants to participate. So here's our setting event. Lisa has no friends and limited opportunity for social interaction. Triggering event is that the teacher withdraws from Lisa to attend to other students. So we're thinking about the function here. I'm seeing a function of attention, right? I don't have friends. I'm not able to engage with social interaction. My teacher's now just pulled attention away from me. So now I'm going to make noises and fiddle with material. So that's what Lisa starts engaging in. And the consequence now is the teacher's scolding Lisa for disrupting the classroom and she moves her seat closer. What would be a good replacement behavior? What can we teach Lisa instead if she wants to get attention from the teacher? Any ideas?
Help her communicate.
Yeah. So what would be a good way? What should she do in a classroom to get the teacher's attention, do you think?
Raise her hand, walk up to the teacher, tap her on the shoulder.
All of those things, right? That's going to help me to not have to scold Lisa, right? And have to move her seat. What about a desired behavior? What do you think that might look like? Thinking about in the classroom, I'm a teacher. She wants my attention, but I have to withdraw it. I have to attend to these other students. What would we love for her to be able to do?
Calm herself.
Right.
Again, communicate.
Right. We would like, maybe she can talk to the peer next. Maybe it's like free time and she can talk to the peer next to her. Maybe she's just able to engage in, her work and realize, okay, in 15 minutes, we're going to change classes and I'll get to, access the teacher. I can ask her a question then. So we wanted to really think about what can I do instead of, right? Because we can't always get attention right when we need it. So we have to learn to be patient and wait, seek it out in other ways. So that's a great idea. And then the typical consequence is now she's going to earn attention later. Maybe not in the moment, but she's going to seek out and access attention in other forms. We're going to do one more. This one, for the setting event, there are frequent changes and interruptions that disrupt the routine in the classroom. So it's very chaotic. Kiddo's not liking that. Some triggering antecedent. The teacher gives Andy a paper to complete, and it contains many difficult items. So what does Andy do? He's now ripping it up and throwing it on the floor. And the maintaining consequence, the teacher reduces the work required and also asks the peer to help Andy. But what do we think a good replacement behavior for Andy to do? So the teacher gives Andy a paper to complete it and it contains many difficult items. What could be a replacement for Andy? Any ideas? What Andy could do is he could ask for help, right? He could raise his hand and ask for help. He could understand that maybe I'll just do the first couple of problems and take a break, and then I'll go back to it and do another couple of problems and I can chunk it. So he can think about ways to still complete the work. Maybe he can ask if he can move his environment. Maybe can I go sit in the chair in the back corner because it's really loud right now and I'm not able to focus. So he can request, right, to be able to do the worksheet in a different way. And his desired behavior, we would love for him to be able to calmly complete this, right? That's the ultimate goal. That would be the desired behavior, that it's going to get done and he's able to figure out in his own way. And the typical consequences, he completes his work, he receives good marks, he gets, reinforced for that. And so this is where we want to keep this typical consequence. So when we think about shaping behavior, not only are we teaching a replacement behavior, but intermittently these desired behaviors start to emerge, which is really great. But we don't understand the function we are going to get the replacement behavior wrong, and we're not going to be able to change that behavior. So if, frequent changes and interruptions are affecting Andy, and we see that he wants escape, right? He's getting this paper and he doesn't want it. He wants to avoid it. But instead I'm giving him all this attention. That's not going to help him, right? He needs help with this. He wants to escape or avoid it. So how do we help him to do that? So thinking about breaking it down to smaller tasks for him, having a peer maybe help sit with him and guide him through some of the more challenging components of that math worksheet, reducing the tasks if needed. Any questions on that? Okay, so we are going to get to continue with classroom management strategies next time. This is where we really get into the heart of what we're going to teach in our classroom and how to shape those environments. So I thank you for being with me today. I appreciate the time that we spent and would love to hear Q&A from anybody. I guess Q's and I would be the A.
While we wait to see if any questions come in, thank you very much, Tahra. We really appreciate your informative webinar. And at this time, we will stop the recording.